Before the sun rises over the red earth of the Sahel, a cool mist hangs low on the ground, and the silence is broken only by the distant rumble of trucks on dirt roads. Inside those trucks packed in burlap sacks lies something almost forgotten by the world, but remembered in the songs of elders. It is called Nama, a native potato that has quietly survived for nearly 900 years in the villages of Burkina Faso. No brand name, no corporate logo. Just a root that once saved families during famine and now carries the weight of a nation's future. For decades, this crop was nearly erased by colonial agriculture, dismissed as backward, replaced by imported hybrids. Its name survived only in whispers and in planting songs older than most modern states. And yet, under the leadership of President Ibrahim Traoré, this humble tuber has stepped out of the shadows. It is no longer just food, it is a symbol of sovereignty, dignity, and memory. In just a few short years, Nama has gone from legend to lifeline, from forgotten root to billion-dollar export. But more than money, it has revived something far more powerful, the idea that Africans can feed themselves without asking permission. And now the question facing Burkina Faso and the world is as bold as it is urgent. Can a single root grown in silence for centuries truly transform not just one country, but the very way Africa sees its future? Or will powerful forces try once again to bury it? If you believe that truth matters more than headlines, and that Africa's awakening deserves to be heard, stay with us until the end of this story. Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to support President Ibrahim Traoré's vision, and subscribe if you believe that the future of Africa and the truth behind it must never again be silenced. The rediscovery of Nama did not begin with government officials or multinational investors. It began with a quiet walk in the hills of Toma in 2021. Dr. Abu Bakarza, a local agroecologist, noticed a small, stunted potato-like plant growing stubbornly out of the poorest soil. Villagers called it the root of rain, a crop said to hold water deep within its body, feeding not only families, but also the land itself. To the outside world, it was nothing. To the people of the Sahel, it was memory itself. Curious, Dr. Bakarza collected samples and sent them for genetic testing. The results shocked scientists across West Africa. This was no ordinary potato, it was Nama, the legendary cultivar described in 12th century oral histories of the Funi people. A root once thought lost to time had survived centuries of neglect, clinging to the soil like the people who had protected it. In that moment, the myth became fact, and the rebirth of Burkina Faso's forgotten treasure began. The government under President Ibrahim Traoré recognized the potential immediately. Unlike cash crops imposed during the colonial era, Nama was truly indigenous, adapted perfectly to the harsh rhythms of the Sahel. Policies were drafted to protect its seeds, fund local cooperatives, and train farmers in new methods that honored both tradition and science. This was not just an agricultural program, it was a movement of reclamation. Farmers who had once struggled to survive on millet and sorghum were introduced to a fusion of indigenous practices and modern ecological techniques. Solar-powered drip irrigation delivered just enough water to each plant, making use of the sun rather than fighting against it. Neem-based organic pesticides kept away pests without contaminating the land. Traditional composting rituals passed down by grandmothers enriched the fields naturally. The blend of ancestral knowledge and innovation turned what was once a fragile experiment into a booming revolution. The results were staggering. Within only 3 years, yields of Nama increased by over 400%. What had once been harvested in handfuls now filled entire convoys of trucks bound for markets across West Africa. By early 2025, Burkina Faso was producing 1.8 million metric tons of Nama annually. Exports reached over 22 countries, fulfilling 34% of Africa's total potato demand. Revenues surged to $8.4 billion, overtaking traditional staples like cotton and coffee. For a landlocked nation often dismissed as poor and dependent, this was nothing short of historic. But the numbers only tell part of the story. The deeper victory was found in the lives of ordinary citizens. Take the story of Fatoumata, a 42-year-old mother of 4 in Yaba. For most of her life, she farmed millet, earning less than $300 a year. In drought seasons, her family survived on wild greens and occasional food aid. Now, thanks to a village Nama processing hub, she earns triple her old income. Her eldest son attends university. Her youngest wears shoes for the first time, and at night she still sings the ancient planting songs. Only this time she sings them while labeling export boxes proudly marked, "Made in Burkina Faso." In town after town, the story repeated itself. Cooperatives of widows who once depended on handouts now built their own clinics with Nama profits. Children who once walked barefoot now carried school bags. Youth who once fled to cities in search of opportunity began to return home, finding work in fields, drying facilities, and transportation. What had been dismissed as a forgotten crop was suddenly rewriting the country's economic and social map. For President Traoré, Nama's rebirth was more than an economic milestone. It was proof that sovereignty could take root in the soil itself. By protecting Nama as a community-owned resource, Burkina Faso showed the world that dignity could not be imported and memory could not be patented. As sacks of the potato rolled out of dusty villages toward distant capitals, they carried more than food. They carried a message the future of Africa would not be dictated from Paris, Washington, or Beijing, but grown from its own earth on its own terms. The question that remained was this: how long would such independence be tolerated by the outside world? Success had brought prosperity, but it had also attracted attention, and with attention came those who would try to claim what was never theirs. Success always draws eyes, and by mid-2025, the once-forgotten root of Burkina Faso was no longer a secret. Nama was appearing in high-end supermarkets from Lagos to Paris, and the world's agribusiness giants began circling like vultures. The first to arrive were the suits from Monsanto. They came not through the dusty fields where farmers still sang planting songs, but through the polished lobbies of hotels in Ouagadougou, armed with glossy brochures and polished promises. Their offer seemed tempting: hybridize Nama, place it in their global seed catalog, and provide access to cutting-edge labs, irrigation systems, and Western markets. Bigger yields, faster growth, global reach — it all sounded like progress. But buried deep in their contracts lay the real cost: licensing fees, genetic patents, and a shift of control from the villages of Burkina Faso to boardrooms thousands of miles away. If accepted, Nama would no longer belong to the people who had kept it alive through famine and song. It would become another commodity, owned, branded, and priced by outsiders. Soon after, representatives from the World Bank arrived with their own pitch. They spoke of refrigerated rail lines, mechanized processing plants, and loans in the hundreds of millions of dollars to modernize the industry. But these loans came with structural reforms, foreign oversight committees, and export quotas that would leave Burkina Faso's sovereignty hanging by a thread. At this critical moment, the spotlight shifted to President Ibrahim Traoré. The easy choice would have been to accept these offers, secure international funding, impress investors, and appear on the world stage as a partner in development. But Traoré chose differently. When it came time to speak, he didn't stand behind microphones in a Western-style press conference. He stood before farmers, students, and cooperative leaders at the gates of the Zenari Agro Complex, a new solar-powered processing plant owned entirely by Burkina Faso's cooperatives. Looking straight into the cameras, his words cut like a blade. These potatoes are not for dependency, they are for dignity. That declaration was more than a rejection of contracts. It was a thunderclap of independence. For the first time, Burkina Faso had told the most powerful corporations and institutions in the world no. This seed will not be patented. This soil will not be mortgaged. The reaction was electric. In Ouagadougou, women danced in the streets carrying baskets of Nama overhead, chanting freedom songs. In Tugan, farmers painted slogans across warehouse walls: "Our roots, our rights." In Yaba, children wrote essays at school calling Nama the potato of freedom. What had begun as an agricultural revival was becoming a cultural uprising. Traoré's government moved quickly to turn symbolism into policy. Law 2025-131 was passed, granting permanent tax exemptions to women-led cooperatives and youth-run startups working with native crops. It mandated that any export deal include direct profit sharing with the villages that cultivated the root. In essence, it rewrote the rules of agriculture, placing the people, not corporations, at the center of trade. The world took notice. International media rushed to cover what they called the potato revolution. Economists debated whether a heritage-based economy could truly compete with corporate agriculture. Lobbyists for biotech companies accused Burkina Faso of romanticizing the past. But for the people living it, the meaning was clear. Nama was not just a product, it was proof. Proof that a forgotten crop could become an engine of sovereignty. Proof that dignity could not be loaned, it had to be planted. The cultural impact deepened when in July 2025 the Festival of Nama was held publicly for the first time in generations. Once banned under colonial rule, the festival returned in a wave of drum songs and blessings. At its center stood Yakuba Tambora, an 83-year-old elder who still remembered the full planting song. That morning, his voice carried across the crowd, each line answered in unison by thousands. The root that fed the drought. The crop that never begged. The tuber that remembered our names when the world forgot. Tears flowed, drums pounded, and a people reclaimed not only a plant, but their own story. If the rediscovery of Nama had been the spark, this was the wildfire. A quiet root had become a banner of resistance, and Burkina Faso's defiance echoed across Africa. Yet, as celebrations filled the streets, one truth remained: saying no to the world's most powerful institutions comes at a cost. And those who once buried Nama would not give up so easily. The revolution of Nama was not only measured in tons exported or billions earned. Its most profound impact was etched into the daily lives of ordinary Burkinabe. Across villages and towns, the humble potato became the foundation of a new social contract, one that bound dignity to soil and sovereignty to community. For decades, families like Fatimata's in Yaba had lived at the edge of survival. Millet harvests brought meager returns, and drought years reduced entire provinces to hunger. Today, her story was no longer about survival, but transformation. With her income tripled by working at a cooperative processing hub, she no longer waited for food aid. Her eldest son studied at university. Her youngest child had shoes for the first time. Her evenings were no longer filled with despair, but with the rhythm of planting songs now sung while labeling export boxes marked "Made in Burkina Faso." This change repeated across the nation. In Saba, a cooperative of widows who had once relied on seasonal millet pulled their Nama profits to build a community health clinic. No NGO logos, no foreign dignitaries, just a hand-painted sign above the door, built from the root. In Wahwa, 7-year-old Mariam helped her family dehydrate thin slices of Nama using a solar dryer purchased through a microloan. Her monthly income surpassed what her mother once earned in a year funding school uniforms and even a tablet where she studied climate science. In Tugan, a mechanic's son named Adrisa launched a repair service for the growing fleet of cold chain trucks. Within a year, his backyard workshop had grown into a 12-man crew, all under 25, keeping the roots moving. But Nama's greatest power was not only economic, it was cultural. For the first time in generations, indigenous knowledge was recognized as science. Parliament passed Decree 2024-09 designating cultivators over age 70 as custodians of agricultural knowledge. These elders received stipends to teach soil rituals, planting techniques, and harvest ceremonies in schools and cooperatives. What had once been dismissed as folklore became a legally protected form of applied science. The Ministry of Education even introduced a new subject, land and legacy, teaching children both the biology of drought-resistant crops and the history of how colonial policies had erased local food systems. This fusion of tradition and modernity shifted the political landscape. For decades, agricultural policy in Burkina Faso had been donor-driven, shaped by IMF loans and external reforms. Now, for the first time, the blueprint came from within. Lawmakers began drafting policies modeled after the Nama framework, protecting native crops from foreign patents, mandating cooperative ownership structures, and incentivizing eco-friendly practices rooted in ancestral knowledge. The cultural unity forged by Nama was equally striking. Burkina Faso is a mosaic of ethnic groups, Mosifula Tuareg Gourmanche, often divided by politics or geography. Yet Nama belonged to all and none. Every community remembered it differently, but all recognized it as part of their shared heritage. By law, every Nama cooperative now included an elder advisor, a female director, and a youth apprentice, ensuring generational gender and cultural balance. This structure was not symbolic, it was strategic, making sure no group could claim ownership alone. Politically, President Ibrahim Traoré's bold stance against Monsanto and the World Bank cemented his reputation not just as a head of state, but as a defender of sovereignty. While critics abroad accused him of isolating Burkina Faso at home, he was celebrated as the leader who had refused to sell memory. Approval ratings soared, and the phrase "potato of freedom" became a rallying cry across market, schools, and social media. Yet this defiance also carried risks. Reports surfaced of attempts to smuggle Nama seeds abroad for genetic replication. Parliament responded with Law 2026-14 establishing a National Genetic Heritage Registry to protect native species from foreign patents. The message was unambiguous. Burkina Faso's heritage was not for sale. By 2026, the humble tuber had reshaped not only the nation's economy, but also its identity. What began as an agricultural revival had matured into a social and political revolution, one where sovereignty was not negotiated in Geneva but harvested in the red earth of the Sahel. And as the movement grew, it sparked a wider question across Africa. If Burkina Faso could rediscover its Nama, what treasures lay hidden in the soils of other nations? The rise of Nama was not just a Burkina-Faso story. It was a challenge to the very architecture of global agriculture, and the world was watching. In Washington, policy analysts described Burkina Faso's defiance as concerning warning that rejecting biotech partnerships could isolate the nation from Western markets. Corporate lobbyists in Brussels went further, accusing Ouagadougou of spreading anti-science sentiment that might embolden other African states to resist foreign agricultural aid. Behind the carefully worded statements lay a simple fear: if Burkina Faso could thrive on its own terms, what would stop the rest of Africa from following? International media picked up on the symbolism. Headlines in Paris asked whether Africa's potato revolution was sustainable or merely political theater. Business journals in London debated whether a heritage-based economy could withstand the pressure of global supply chains. Yet the more outsiders questioned it, the more the movement gained legitimacy across the continent. For many Africans, criticism from the West was itself a sign that Nama mattered. Even in the United States, reactions were divided. Some academic institutions praised Burkina Faso for blending indigenous knowledge with ecological science, calling it a model for climate-resilient agriculture. Others, particularly those tied to biotech industries, warned of lost opportunities for investment. On talk shows, commentators compared Traoré's stand to earlier struggles over oil and gold, arguing that Africa was once again rejecting foreign control over its most valuable resource. Meanwhile, across the global south, the response was far more enthusiastic. In Brazil, Amazonian communities saw parallels between Nama and their own forgotten cassava strains. In Vietnam, agricultural researchers traveled to Ouagadougou to study how indigenous crops could be revived without surrendering to multinational patents. In Tunisia, desert farmers adapted Nama's water retention methods to improve date palm cultivation. Far from isolation, Burkina Faso had sparked a new conversation about memory-driven development, a framework where progress came not from imported models, but from recovering what had been buried by colonialism. The African Union could not ignore the momentum. By late 2025, its agricultural charter included explicit protections for indigenous crops modeled directly on Burkina Faso's Nama decrees. Ministers from Mali, Kenya, and Zimbabwe visited the Zenari agro-complex not to offer aid, but to learn. For once, Africa was not the subject of experiments in Geneva or Brussels, it was setting the agenda. This shift unsettled Washington and Brussels. Trade envoys quietly pressured Burkina Faso to reconsider its rejection of World Bank loans. Rumors spread of covert attempts to obtain Nama seeds for genetic replication abroad. Security analysts even raised alarms about the geopolitical risks of Africa asserting sovereignty through agriculture. For many Western strategists, the fear was clear: if a potato could fuel such independence, what would happen if oil, gold, or even technology were approached with the same philosophy? Yet for the people of Burkina Faso, these global debates mattered less than what they saw at home: full baskets, in-markets jobs for their children, and clinics built without foreign aid. Traoré summarized it best at the Pan-African Food Sovereignty Forum in Accra: "We are not rejecting science. We are redefining it. Our laboratories begin in the field with the farmers who kept us alive when nothing else grew." His words resonated not just in Africa, but across the developing world, where communities long dismissed as subsistence farmers began to see themselves as innovators and exporters. By 2026, the world could no longer dismiss Nama as a curiosity. It had become a litmus test of sovereignty. For the West, it was a warning: Africa would no longer accept dependency disguised as development. For Africa, it was an invitation to rediscover its own strengths and trade on its own terms. And for ordinary Americans watching from afar, it posed an uncomfortable but necessary question: if Burkina Faso could reclaim its forgotten crop to feed itself, what has America forgotten in its own soil? As the sun sets over the Sahel, fields of Nama glow, gold against the horizon. Women carry woven baskets filled to the brim, children race ahead laughing, and elders walk slowly, their hands brushing the leaves like greeting old friends. It is a harvest scene, but it is also something more. It is a reminder that sovereignty can begin in the soil. For Burkina Faso, Nama is not simply food, it is proof. Proof that a nation once dependent on foreign aid can feed itself. Proof that the wisdom of ancestors once dismissed as superstition holds the keys to survival in an age of climate crisis. Proof that dignity does not need permission, but with proof comes danger. Reports already speak of attempts to smuggle Nama seeds across borders of corporate interests, plotting to patent what was never theirs. President Ibrahim Traoré's warning echoes across the continent. If you take the seed but forget the song, you will lose it again. The real threat is not hunger but forgetting the knowledge, the culture, the memory that makes true independence possible. And so the story of Nama leaves us with a question that is larger than Burkina Faso. What have we forgotten in our own soil? What wisdom sleeps in our villages waiting to be revived? Because perhaps the future is not in what we invent, but in what we remember. If you believe that Africa's awakening deserves to be heard, please share this story so more people know that a humble potato has become a symbol of sovereignty. And if you believe that truth matters more than headlines, subscribe and join us, because the world is only beginning to witness what Africa and leaders like Ibrahim Traoré can grow from their own ground.